Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Lenape peoples who have longstanding relationships to the land, water, and region of southwestern Ontario. The local First Nation communities of this area include the Chippewas of the Thames First Nation, Oneida Nation of the Thames First Nation, and Munsee Delaware Nation. We acknowledge the treaties that are specific to this area: Treaty 2, the McKee Purchase; Treaty 3, Between the Lakes Purchase; Treaty 6, London Township Purchase; Treaty 21, Longwoods Purchase; and Treaty 29, the Huron Tract Purchase. We value the significant contributions, both in the past and the present, of local and regional First Nations of Turtle Island. We acknowledge historic and ongoing injustices the Indigenous peoples endure in Canada, and we affirm our commitment to honoring Indigenous voices, nations, and cultures, and to move forward in the spirit of reconciliation and respect. Now, just before we begin today's meeting, I would like to take a moment to highlight some of the activities that are taking place this week during Truth and Reconciliation Week, as well as on Monday next week on September 30th. During the week of September 23rd to the 27th, Middlesex County Libraries will be providing a variety of ways to learn more about First Nations culture and language, including storytime programs featuring Indigenous stories, branch displays, which will exhibit items that highlight culture and languages, and in some of the branches with programming rooms, lunch and learn plans include streaming of sessions available from the National Centre for Truth and Reconciliation. September 30th is the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation and was enacted through federal legislation as an integral part of the reconciliation process, specifically Call to Action number 80. This is also the day that the Indigenous community raises awareness of the impacts of residential schools and reminds us all that every child matters by promoting the Orange Shirt Day. The orange shirts symbolize the stripping away of culture, freedom, and self-esteem experiences by Indigenous children over the generations. This day serves to honor the survivors of residential schools, as well as those children who never saw their homes and families again, and to commemorate the historical and ongoing impacts of these schools on the children's families and their communities. Various events, activities, and gatherings are planned in community across the county and country, and I encourage you and hope you will take this opportunity to learn more and will be part of this transformative journey. I will now look for disclosures of pecuniary interest. Seeing none, we can now move to the approval of the agenda. The motion before us is that the agenda be approved as presented. Councillor Clark, Councillor Grantham, all in favor? And that is carried. Thank you. And next we have minutes from the September 10th meeting and the closed sessions from the September 10th, 2024 meeting of County Council. Councillor Smyber moving and seconded by, Councillor Ropp. Thank you very much. All in favor of that? And that is carried as well. Under new business. The first item on the agenda is the lease agreement for the Waterloo Ambulance Station. We have a report from Chris Trainey, the Deputy CAO and County Engineer, and Cindy Howard, Deputy CAO and County Treasurer. Cindy's going to start. Okay, Cindy, the floor is yours when you're ready.
Great, thanks. Through the Warden to Council. This report is for the lease agreement of Waterloo Ambulance Station. This is a triple net lease as outlined in the report. So that means that for MLPS, we'll pay the base rent, building insurance, utilities, operating, and maintenance costs. The County of Middlesex is responsible for capital costs related to the structure. This is a 20-year lease that starts in 2024 and ends in 2043. The lease agreement takes into account the costs associated with the required renovations of $3 million. The 20-year lease is consistent with other leases in place between county and MLPS. The recommendation is that the bylaw be introduced at the council meeting. Bill, Chris Trainey, and myself are happy to answer any questions, as well as David, who's here as well.
Okay, thank you for that report. I'm looking for questions. I'll start with you, Councillor Grantham.
Yeah, thank you, Warden. Through you, I'll go to the treasurer. The first one may be easy. It's for my education. I know what a net lease is. What's a triple net lease?
Through the warden to counselor, just kind of how I described, it's really all the costs associated other than structure go to the tenant.
Thank you, Warden. And then my last two questions are with regards to the rent and the leasehold improvements we have done and are undergoing on Waterloo Street. I just want to ensure that we're recouping those costs because it does talk about future leasehold improvements being worked back in as additional rent. So just want to ensure that the current ones are being recouped. That was my one question. And lastly, I'm curious as to whether or not 20 years, I know it's a common practice, but whether or not 20 years is too long in this case. I'm fine with the lease. I just want to make those two questions.
Yeah, through the warden to Councilor Grantham, I'll tackle both of those questions for you. So the funds that are included in the 20-year lease today are going to include all the renovations to the building to bring it up to a standard for a modern paramedic station. So we've got right now we're doing some remediation of some leftover asbestos from the building. Of course, this building is decades old. So we're doing some of that work. We're updating the washroom facilities. We're updating electrical works within the building. We're doing all those types of kind of core repairs and also creating a space for delivery community paramedicine. That's also going to be followed by updating of the current paramedic space. So just bringing it up to current standards, making it more livable space for our paramedics who operated at that station. And then there's some money there as well to deal with things like windows, anything to do with piping or sewers or those types of things. So we have that in the lease. And then we have, as with anything with a building and for a 20-year lease, there's some money in there for structural repairs that will come up from time to time during that kind of a life span of a lease. And the 20-year lease just allows the cost of those renovations, because they are fairly substantial, to be spread out over a longer period of time. Sort of like having a 20 or 30-year mortgage. There's more time for the tenant to pay back those costs within the leasehold improvements to the owner or the landlord, the county in this case. So a shorter period would have greatly increased the cost to the tenant to recoup the costs of the improvements to the building, which are desperately needed at 340 Waterloo.
Go ahead, Councillor.
Yeah, just one follow-up. So in the lease, is there, for lack of a better word, for the county, an out clause at some point in time if we were approached about selling the property?
And through the warden to Councilor Grantham, there's always some kind of an out clause with any kind of lease. We're not locked in. Of course, it would come to negotiations with the tenant. We're the owner, so we would act as the owner, as an owner of any building similar to this building. We sold this building and have moved forward from there. And we could do the same thing, assign the lease to a new owner. If a prospective owner came up to buy the building, certainly could assume the lease the same as they could assume a lease from us for any other of the properties under ownership that have tenants in those buildings.
I see Councillor Mayhew.
Thank you, Madam Warden. Just 2 points. The duration of the lease, Chris, doesn't bother me because it allows us to get the net benefit out of our investment. Question to Bill. Bill, the location, is it a good location and is it a suitable location? I'm sure that the geographical aspect of it has been part of our long range goals. Any comment on that in terms of its positioning?
Right. So I'll put on my MLPS hat in CEO of MLPS and answering this question. And I'll tell you that it was extremely difficult. We've been on the search for a downtown property for a very long time, went to RFP looking for a downtown property. We have a couple of really unique disadvantages when it comes to finding a property. We don't have, because we're not a City of London service, we're a county service, we don't have the same planning controls where we can get access the way police and fire can to certain properties and be able, so we have to go out in the open market, compete with everybody else for properties. And there just aren't a lot of available properties in the downtown area that have the size of footprint that we can afford for a public service like this with the appropriate zoning. There aren't. And so when we did identify another location through the RFP process, It was a very small footprint and really didn't suit our needs, but it was in a good location because you've quite rightly pointed out that you can't just be anywhere downtown either. And it became where this option of renovating this existing building and buying it instead of building new on a smaller footprint became the best option from a service perspective, because I just highlight this for you. The top floor is going to be occupied by our community paramedicine team. And our community paramedicine team is very active in the mental health and drug addiction and drug support with what they do in downtown London. And there couldn't be a better location, I don't think, to deliver that service out of there. And also, one of the things we notice when we're looking for zoning changes or for new properties is the public around, do they have the expectation that there's going to be an emergency service with lights and sirens flashing already? And that's hard when you're doing new developments in downtown or anywhere else. The public expectation is there, it's an ambulance station there already. So it is a perfect location, not only from the types of services we're going to deliver out of there, but also because there'll be less public reaction to having lights and sirens because they've been there for 50 years. So from my perspective, it's a fantastic location to deliver the service out of.
Is there anyone else? I don't see any hands, so thank you for that report. There is a motion before us that the lease agreement for Waterloo Ambulance Station report be received for information and that a bylaw be introduced at the September 2024 council meeting to authorize and approve 340 Waterloo Street lease agreement with the Middlesex London Emergency Medical Services Authority and authorize the warden and the county clerk to execute the agreement. I get a mover, please, and a second. Councillor McGuire, Councillor Brennan, all in favor? And that is carried. Moving on to inquiries, are there any items? Councillor Burkhart, yes.
Great, thanks. And through the warden, I've just got a quick question for Cindy. As we think about preparing for the budget, just wondering where we are with the 2023 audit process.
Through the warden to the counselor, thank you for asking that question. Just so you know, I've emailed the audit partner at KPMG and asked the same thing in terms of when can we wrap it up and get it to council. If we can't get it the first meeting in October, it's definitely coming the second meeting in October and we'll have it finished off by then.
Are there other?
Can I just
go
have
ahead.
just a follow-up? Is there a particular reason why it is so late in the year that we will be receiving that?
Through the warden to counselor, yes, I can respond to that. And there's a number of things. So in terms of, there's a lot for us to process and we've had some turnover in staff. The other thing is if we have to move dates with our auditors, it takes time to get them back. So that's been some of the problems in terms of having them come back and look at things. So it's been a little bit more ad hoc this year than it has been in previous years. And then we also have a final piece where we do from the city or so. So we need to, if you know, for childcare, the funding, the dollars that we're talking about are quite significant. So I really want to make sure that we have the finalized numbers for that as well.
Is there anyone else? Okay, so next we have councillors' comments and other business. Seeing none, we now can move into the committee of the whole. There is a motion before us that the committee of the whole convene at 1:14 p.m. If I could have a mover, Councillor Smybert and Councillor McMillan, all in favor? Thank you, that is carried. The first item up today is a delegation. We have a presentation from Kimberly Earls, who is the Executive Director of SCORE, Amy Martin, Mayor of Norfolk County, and Chair of SCORE Economic Development, and Ed Ketchabaugh, Warden of Elgin County. If you'd like to come, I think the front seats will be available for you there. So welcome today. Thank you for coming, and I'm going to turn my my system off. You can push yours, and then the floor is yours when you're ready.
Okay, thank you very much for having us. Beautiful, beautiful space. My first time here. I'm Amy Martin, Mayor of Norfolk County, and I am the current chair of SCORE. And this is our Vice Chair, Ed Ketchabaugh. And we wanted to touch base with you on the work that SCORE has been up to from a regional perspective, some of the advocacy work that we've been doing as of late, and connect with our partners. So next slide, please. One more. So as you well know, Norfolk County, County of Brant, Oxford County, Middlesex, and Elgin County all working together through the creation of SCORE Economic Development Corporation. We started around 2010 when the decline of the tobacco industry began, but really I think it's just a beautiful thing that we came together. It doesn't quite matter what brought us together. It's the work that we've been doing since then. And so many of us go and work on advocacy for our municipalities, and we talk about how important rural Ontario is, how important the little guy is. And that message has been very well received with the province to date. And it's the beautiful thing about SCORE. We take a regional approach and we advance the priorities of all of our regional partners. Next slide, please. Right sized, 1 in 5. So we have 1 staff member and we bring on a couple extras from time to time, but we lean on the municipal partners and staff that we have through all of the regional partners. And we'll touch on that a little bit later when we talk about the membership price and what that ROI is for each municipality. Next slide. And here are your SCORE representatives who do an outstanding job. Quite often at our conferences, we are very busy with our own municipal responsibilities, and we lean on your 2 members who represent you to lead delegations, to meet with ministers on behalf of the entire SCORE group. And it's a really wonderful team effort. And I have to say, as Mayor of Norfolk County, working with partners not only here representing you around the table, but with other partners in SCORE, I've made some really great friends that have allowed me to collaborate and build on what our municipality is doing through the umbrella of SCORE. Next slide. This is just a quick slide. May I borrow this? My eyes aren't that good. And it's talking about your representatives. It's also showing how we trickle. Actually, we can go one more slide over, please. How we trickle through staff resources and the structure of the staff who participate from each municipality, and then the stakeholder advisory committees that they sit on. And this slide is a really great visual demonstrating how far and wide the reach of SCORE is outside of just our caucus group meetings. There's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes with other committees, with ministries and delegations outside of conferences. Next slide. So we have a regional strategy with priorities that the board sets. And right now our focus, and has been our focus for some years because it's critical, has been infrastructure required to support economic development, human capital required to support economic development, and then a key sector focus is agriculture and agri-food. Next slide. One more. Okay, I'm going to touch a little bit here on transit. So some of our strategic priorities and the work that we've been really proud of is the SCT program. So this is a map showing the interconnectivity on transit, and Kathy is an absolute champion taking this issue to Queen's Park and to our ministers on a regular basis. And it really demonstrates the work that we can do regionally when we put our heads together. If we can go next slide, please. So important to note that transit funding is set to expire in March of 2025. And this member system currently represents a population base of about 100 million. And when we put everyone together, we've got 21,000 square kilometers of land that we're covering. So of that, when we connect our communities, we touch 2 million. And of that 2 million, we have 375,000 residents are over the age of 65, and 200,000 of those residents are low income. So there is demand and need to support transit in our rural communities. In 2021, when SCT ridership started, the numbers told us that we had about 38,000 riders. Ridership jumped up in 2023 to 119,000 riders in change, which is an increase of over 200%. And as of June 2024, we know that we're at 64,000 in ridership, and we plan to exceed that 119,000 ridership. So it's being used. It is a wonderful tool for our communities. And next slide, please. I think one of my favorite facts about SCT is the fact that we know that the riders are taking the bus to get to work. And so there is an estimated, if we take on average, assume everybody's earning a salary of $41,600, there's an overall economic impact of $748 million in our communities due to transit. If we were to lose that transit, what would happen to that revenue? Next slide. I'm going to pass it over to my vice chair, Ed.
Thank you very much, Amy, and good afternoon, Madam Warden. And it's good to see you and to be in the room with the esteemed councillors of Middlesex County. Some of the other priorities that we want to hit on, and just to bring the light of something that SCORE has been working on in the past and continues to work on. The first one, this illustrates short line rail. Rail is an important infrastructure, not only just because of where the Cayuga line lies from Cortland and Norfolk County through to Elgin, just east of St. Thomas. But even it's important to Middlesex County. And though we don't have a short line initiative currently in Middlesex, but there are, and I would willing to argue that there are Middlesex goods moving along that short line. For example, if you consider that the majority of crop production in Middlesex is grains and oilseeds, some of that corn finds its way down to Casco, some of it finds its way down to the ethanol plant in Elmer. And those products are moved back out using the short line rail along the Cayuga subdivision. One other fact I want to bring forward about the Cayuga subdivision is that I am aware that the city of St. Thomas approached Kim for information on the Cayuga subdivision when they made application for the mega site. And it's that addition of rail infrastructure, I'm sure, contributed greatly to that site being selected in St. Thomas for the PowerCo investment. And just to touch on that, the Cayuga subdivision is being expanded. In fact, it will service the Yarmouth Yards, which is where PowerCo is, and it will service the rail to road yards, which is just south of the PowerCo site, and it's branching further up into the Broccolini property beside Amazon. So there's an expansion of short line rail happening within the region, and it has an opportunity to benefit everyone, not only from an environmental perspective, a bulk carrier of goods and services, but also, you know, just the economic principle of moving them cheaper. We go to the next slide. I think I've already covered this off in my verbatim. Let's move on to one more slide, then infrastructure on energy. Energy, of course, is like any other piece of infrastructure. We need it in order to grow, whether it be pipes in the ground, water, wastewater, stormwater. But when we talk about energy, we're talking about natural gas or power, or, hydroelectric power corridors. In 2016, we know that SCORE was involved very much from an advocacy role to help promote and push the expansion of natural gas in through our rural areas to promote agricultural production, as well as an opportunity for industry in the area. Let's move on with the next slide. Housing. This is an interesting one that SCORE got involved with a year ago. Actually, it was on the tail end of the pandemic. And the initiative actually comes from Eastern Ontario, was rolled in through the Western Ontario region through SCORE, the 5-county region. And this is what the Rural Housing Information System put on or sponsored by the Rural Ontario Institute. Essentially, what it is a cataloging of what the available housing infrastructure is out there in order to identify the needs going forward of what we need for to accommodate residents moving into the area for new industrial applications. Let's move on with advocacy, and I'll turn it back over to Amy.
Thank you very much. So earlier this year, we were invited to Queen's Park to speak to the Standing Committee of the Interior for Bill 165. Sorry, one more slide, please, for us. And that was on the leave to construct. We were successful in our advocacy efforts, requesting that the government make an amendment and pass the bill to see leave to construct be amended from a $2 million threshold to $10 million, because from a regional perspective, we were aware of businesses that were putting infrastructure, natural gas in the ground, and that number exceeded the $2 million, which triggered the leave to construct threshold and added about 2 years onto the timeline for them to get their businesses up and running. And so they withdrew their interests in the region, and a couple of them even went to the States. So there's ongoing advocacy effort that happens outside of the conferences, and this is just one example recently this year. Next slide, please. And then at the AMO and Roma conference, as I've mentioned, we really make our rounds as best as we can, hitting on those key priorities, but also meeting with opposition parties, sharing our regional perspective, and it's always well received. And you can imagine when you go into a room with a minister and they have a few minutes, we're able to talk about a broad perspective and key common interests, and that's of great interest to them. Next slide. And one more, please. And so this really speaks again to some of those committees and the far reach that we have. We're talking about education in schools, satellite campuses, and post-secondary education. We talk about supply chain resiliency projects, the workforce planning board, workforce development through St. Thomas, and more. So there are a lot of subcommittees that are advancing the priorities. Next slide. And 2025 initiatives.
Okay, thank you very much, Amy, for that. If we look at this slide, what we're trying to demonstrate there are some of the things that SCORE is currently working on. When we talk about a regional supply development project, supply chain development project, maybe the one way to think about it is at the AMO conference, the Premier announced the relaunch of a portal. So you could go online, you could see where those development lands, shovel-ready development lands are. This goes deeper at SCORE. What we're attempting to do is to create an inventory available for all of our members here of all those lands that may not have services in the ground yet, but they may have in years 1, 2, 3 down the road. So in other words, many of us have inventories on our official plans where we've identified areas for industrial development, but we haven't proceeded to put the services in the ground. SCORE's inventory or supply chain development project will have and create that kind of inventory base, so that should a developer or someone come calling, we have the capacity then to pass on that information to them of where within the region might meet their needs. So I think that's an important one to keep in mind. With respect to workforce resilience, well, again, we're preparing for future workforce needs within the region. Staff are working actively with both the Grand Erie and the Elgin, Middlesex, Oxford workforce planning boards. And as well, Kim, something I learned last year, and kept a secret from us, but you are working with the Ministry of Labor and trying to lay the foundations for having sufficient labor supply to deal with the larger regional investments, such as PowerCo. And I understand the current similar initiative is taking place at Stellantis. And I assume something like that will be going on in Alliston with Honda. So SCORE, again, has a reach and is respected by the province, and they're reaching out to us for that kind of expertise and insight into the region. And of course, we've already talked about regional transportation advancement, and that includes both the Southwest Community Transit Program and the freight rail. Speaking as a member community that doesn't have a community transit program, we're very interested in moving forward with that in the near future in Elgin County. Once we have a justification report through our master transportation plan, then we can move forward from there. But in speaking with various ministry officials at the recent AMO conference, they all come forward and say to me, and I'm talking about MTO or Ministry of Transportation, they hold up SCORE and the SCT model as the one to copy. And SCT was an initiative that sprung around SCORE. In fact, I recall sitting in the committee room next door a few years ago when we were talking about transportation and how to establish a common rate collection system. So it's been years in the making, and I'm really glad that it has gotten thus far because Elgin's looking to get on board. We go to the next slide. Membership value. Let's go on one more. Long-term strategic planning. That's yours.
Okay, so obviously everything, we have a high level of accountability in the work that we do. So we're building out a long-term strategic plan that is going to attract funding, attract opportunities, attract investment for all of our partners. And so next slide, please. We want to talk a little bit about what we've been up to and give you some information that you can share with your community members. So direct investment attracted 186.5. This talks about what we've brought in, supporting us from wages to project support and some transit funding. If we go over to the partner investment dollars, the next slide. This is specific projects that have received funding from various municipalities. We're just under $1 million that has gone out, not across the region blanket, but to a variety of different partners. And then next slide, we know that together as SCORE, we brought in almost $300 million to the region. And so I think the next slide is the perfect time to remind you that the membership fee is $30,000.
This slide that's before you, of course, it's very high level, but what it's trying to do is be illustrative of what you're getting for your $30,000 membership. If you look at the first line, we're suggesting that your first $30,000, well, the first is equivalent to giving you access to an executive director of an economic development corporation. That same $30,000 gives you access to 2 additional part-time staff. SCORE is a lean, very lean organization. If you think about your 5 members and $30,000 each, it's $150,000 a year. Even with the attraction of grants to help us move forward with project development, it still is a very lean organization. When you consider a few slides ago of the access to those economic development professionals across the 5 partners, and then the organizations underneath and the ministries. But we concentrate simply on those staff members at the upper and central tier level. You have access to, and I think it's a very conservative number that they're using here, an $800,000 staffing equivalent. And then, of course, like all politicians, we like to think that we're all invaluable. And so I'm not sure how you place a value on the fact that you've got 8 other elected officials that you have access to at any time across the region. But anyway, we'll think it's just extremely invaluable. So for that $30,000 investment, we would suggest to you, just at a very high level, it's worth $980,000 to you. That's what that is trying to determine. There's a couple of things that I think that aren't on the slides, but I think it's worth mentioning. Because I'm not aware of how many members around your horseshoe were here in 2010. And I don't know if anyone was. And I know there wasn't anyone around Elgin County either. But the point I'm trying to make is sometimes you need to look back and have a retrospective of where you've been to move forward. SCORE, as well as being an advocacy outfit, yes, it is. And we do that to keep in front of ministries and keep issues moving forward. But we're much more than that. And we've tried to demonstrate through the leverage of funds that we're also a project management team. In fact, if we want to go even further, I used the term the other day and I got permission from Kim that I could say it. I would call SCORE a dream factory, an innovative center. Some of these projects, which are actually going on throughout the region today, had a lot of the foundations that started through ideas that may be generated from the original Mayor's Roundtable, which then evolved into the SCORE family in 2010. Now let's talk about the SCT. That was a SCORE initiative. Let's talk about Food Hub, which then evolved into FreshSpoke, and it's still operating today. And I believe you have a prominent agricultural entity within Middlesex County that still takes use or advantage of FreshSpoke. It's across the region. What that is a data set for an electronic order desk from institutions can come forward and order through this particular FreshSpoke hub and order in fresh product for their needs, thereby bypassing the middleman. So it's working. We've already talked on short line rail. That was a SCORE initiative. And though it's not unique in Ontario, but we think the Cayuga subdivision is gaining traction, hitting its stride, and has potential moving forward. And I think there are opportunities that could present themselves in Middlesex as well. The One that Kim and I had a conversation on the other day, and you may not believe this. There's a fiber technology program going on across Ontario right now, particularly in the Southwest, called SWIFT. And though it was spun off from the Western Ontario Wardens Caucus, but it was SCORE and members of SCORE in the early days convinced the Western Ontario Wardens to incorporate in order to spin up the SWIFT initiative and move it forward. So when I say that SCORE is a dream factory, it is. It's an innovation center. And one final note, Madam Warden, I want you to realize this. Not only are you a member partner, you're a part owner. You're 1/5 owner of the corporation. And with that, I thank you for allowing us to be here today, and we're available for any questions.
Thank you for the very comprehensive presentation. I will look to members for any questions, comments. Councillor, I almost called you Mayor, Councillor Grantham.
Thank you, Warden. It doesn't escape me that I know in Strathroy-Caradoc, this is true, that our largest economic driver is still agriculture. I believe we're still that way in the county. And when I read through your presentation, it did warm my heart to see your advocacy and to use the word agriculture and agribusiness. To me, that's very important, again, representing a community that's agriculture centric, even though we have a vibrant and robust industrial area. So my question would lead me to this. Who else is advocating for agriculture? I know we've discussed the possibility of leaving SCORE, but knowing the importance of agriculture to our region, it just leads me to ask that question: who would be advocating for agriculture? And that's more of a question to people around the horseshoe, because I am supportive of the work regarding the agri sector. So thank you for that.
Madam Warden, I don't know if that was a rhetorical question or if you'd like me to take a stab at it. I can try. Okay, my background when I left university is I went as a policy analyst and worked for the Ontario Federation of Agriculture. So the largest general farm organization in Canada, the OFA. So they would be one who would be advocating for agricultural issues. In Middlesex alone, it would be the Middlesex Federation of Agriculture. Then you've got the Christian farmers and you've got the National Farmers Union. I believe there may be a chapter in Middlesex. I'm not aware. Point is, we collaborate very well with the OFA. We've had a strong relationship. It's listed on our list of resources that we can access. And in fact, the regional director for Oxford and Elgin regularly shows up at our board meetings and participates in a resource advisory committee. So yes, SCORE was originally proposed as a think tank in order to help bring innovation to the region because of the demise of certain products within the agriculture sector. But agriculture, you're correct, is still the driver for many of our regions and counties.
And if I may, Madam Chair, through you, all of the partners certainly have strong ties to the agricultural community and want to see preservation of the various industries that contribute to it, the farmland, find a mix between housing, development, infrastructure. We need to put more infrastructure in the ground in our rural communities. But, Norfolk County specifically, 219,000 acres of agricultural land that is top of mind when I do most things. So I would say between the members, between our partners, it's a really great common thread that we have that gets interwoven into everything we do, which is why the province is receptive, because we represent a strong rural Ontario mixture that is also progressive, that also has housing needs, that also has infrastructure needs, and it's relatable.
I'll look to other members of council then. Yes, go ahead, Councillor McMillan.
Thank you, Warden. And through you, I'd like to say thanks very much for that presentation. I may be a little biased having said on the committee, but from my point of view, many things about SCORE, and I've learned a lot actually in being a board member about what SCORE does and how well we're respected they are. You can walk into any ministry on a delegation and they know who you are. we keep in front of their faces all the time. And I think the two things, one is that the idea of having advocacy on behalf of all 5 counties is much stronger than if we were to try and go it alone. You may argue that, but I think the work that Kim Earls does in providing our board members with all the up-to-date information, the initiatives and all that sort of thing is certainly worth a lot. And so at this point, if it's all right with you, may I make a motion?
The clerk says that it's okay to do that.
All right. So the motion that I would like to make is that Middlesex County Council direct that the 2025 Middlesex County South Central Ontario Region SCORE membership be included in the 2025 Middlesex County budget, and that Middlesex County rejoin SCORE.
Okay, we have a motion before us. I am looking for a mover and a seconder. Oh, sorry, mover, seconder for the motion. Yes, I have Councillor Smybert. I'll call the vote then. All of those. Oh, sorry. Yes, go ahead, Councillor Burkhart-Jessen.
I guess I have a question, and this would be directed to Kim and Amy and Ed. And it likely is unfair. I get that. So I'll preface it with that. So later on in our meeting, we've received correspondence from County of Oxford. So they've indicated that they've given their notice, their year's notice for their membership, which would mean they would be done, I think, August or September of next year, something like that, I would think, because that's the year's notice from when you received it. So my question then is, what does that do to the business of the day of SCORE for 2025? At this time, Middlesex has given their notice, and we were to be done at the end of this year. A lot of the work that SCORE does is working with ministries. It's ministry driven, either through program funding, initiatives, that sort of thing. So hypothetically, this goes to budget, and budget says, okay, we'll go back in, but now Oxford's out. What does it look for the business of SCORE?
I'll take that on. For the upcoming year in 2025, it doesn't have any impact, Oxford, because as you said, they're giving notice. They're still in for 2025. So that's the one thing. And I'm almost hesitant to make further comment on that piece of correspondence, but I will, because it was presented at Elgin County this morning as well. I find that correspondence a little out of order in terms of process. It hasn't even gone to the board of directors, and to have it circulated broadly as it is, I think is poor taste. And I'm tempted almost to get after the warden of Oxford for it, but I haven't. I've held my tongue. The circulation of that particular letter without being received by SCORE will eventually make its way up to our funding partners, as you say, at the ministerial level. And what that signals to them is they're scratching their heads and saying, what's going on? Is there some instability there? Does that put our funding in jeopardy? And it possibly could. So, but for the upcoming year in 2025, there is no impact.
If I may just supplement that through you, Madam Chair, I guess to be more direct, fast forward a year and we're down a partner, what does that mean? And is your investment worthwhile still? Certainly we regroup, we re-strategize, we make our message more concise. I'd like to do it without gaps in the region. But this type of thing does happen, unfortunately, and my own council participated in the same discussion last year and it didn't go ahead. I think it's a healthy discussion to have. We have to be responsible with our dollars. I would just remind council that, this is the first time we've seen an increase in this membership price in ever, I believe. And, so that's okay. It's healthy to have that discussion, but I think the partners that are around the table are very committed to continuing with the advocacy, and we're stronger when we do it together, but we'll regroup. We'll narrow in on our message and keep going.
So just on follow-up, I guess I just want to be clear, because at the end of 2024, SCORE is going to be down a member. So we still think that the work of SCORE can be on the investment from 4 counties, still be able to be carried off.
Well, we can go back in history and do a little history lesson again. In 2010, when SCORE was incorporated, and the membership of the day, the board decided that it needed to incorporate a membership fee, because before then it was funded through the Sand Plains. The County of Elgin, to which I have never received a satisfactory answer why, they withdrew. I mean, just gone. But to keep the door open, the municipality of Bayham, whereas that's where I'm from, we stepped in as a local municipal partner in order to stay within the SCORE family. We saw value. I don't think the county council at the time did. I think it was more of a personality disagreement with the executive director of the day and perhaps senior staff at the county. That's what was driving it, but that's what happened. Elgin County, I'm happy to say, is back in the fold. It took me a little while to get there, but we're there. And I think council today sees the value of staying there.
Sorry, Warden. I guess I want clarification on the motion from Councillor McMillan. So it's to bring consideration to keep the membership of SCORE back to the budget committee to be included in budget discussions. Okay.
I would just add that there was the second part that explicitly says, and that Middlesex County rejoin SCORE.
Did you get that part of the, so the motion is the motion before us is that Middlesex County Council direct the 2025 Middlesex County South Central Ontario Region membership be included in the budget, and that Middlesex County rejoin SCORE.
Okay, so on that, I'm a board member, I'm a board representative of SCORE, but I can't support that motion the way it's written. I would consider support to go back to the budget committee to be included in a budget discussion, but at this time I can't support the rejoining of that outside of that budget process.
So the clerk will walk through the process on that.
So Councillor Burkhart-Justin, you're proposing an amendment to the main motion?
No, not necessarily. I'm just saying the way the motion is on the floor, I'm saying I can't support that the way it is. So that's where my vote will be coming from, because I think that the process needs to go to the budget committee, that we're bypassing that process.
Councillor Clark.
Yes, just as a follow-up to Councillor Burkhart-Justin, I agree. I don't think we're in a position to be approving budget items when we haven't received the budget. I would be receptive to considering it at the budget, but to say we're just going to rubber stamp and put it through and then cancel one of Brian's bridges, I can't do that yet. So I think it has to be a fulsome discussion, but I really appreciate the presentation today because it's made me look at it from a different perspective. That I'll be quite honest, part of me was saying, well, what have you done for each municipality? Whereas you have to look at it from 10,000 feet and say, what is it doing for the district to move the district forward? And I think, so I appreciate you coming because it's made me look at it from a different perspective.
Is there anyone else? Councillor Ropp.
Thank you through the warden. I feel the same way. If this motion stays as written, then I won't support the motion. I would support discussion about this. Absolutely, but not just to this motion.
And Councillor McGuire.
Thank you, Madam Warden. My question is procedurally, obviously at some point in time, and I'm not exactly sure when, council made a decision to send the letter expressing our withdrawal from SCORE. So since that decision was made, I'm sure within our procedure by law, it would state when that could next come in front of council, because usually there's a time limit or a process to now bring it back up for redecision, which is really what we're being asked to do. So I'm just looking, and perhaps that need, and I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but I guess my comment is perhaps a staff report outlining the dates and the times with the procedure would help me, unless somebody knows those procedures. I see Councillor Clark saying no, so maybe I'm completely.
No,
wrong
well,
on
I'm
this.
saying because that's already on the floor, it's already been passed, so we've already given notice. So now if we're gonna have a budget meeting and we have a motion, we can vote on this motion. If it's defeated, then someone could make a motion saying, I'd like to move that I would like this decision to be reviewed at the budget meeting. That's something I can support.
Okay, I didn't want to cut you off, but I think the clerk will explain the A, B, and Cs of where we are and what we're going to do today and what next steps are.
So the motion that was passed, I believe, was back in March, was to provide notice of resignation. And so that action was carried out. So that's not an action that can be reconsidered. So under our bylaws, there's no provision we're not reconsidering that decision. And this is a new matter now back on the agenda for consideration today. And the motion would be, there's nothing in our bylaws precluding the motion today.
Okay, I hope that helps. I did see your hand, Councillor Mayhew.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think governance of the future must avoid duplication. And we're considering a new economic footprint further on in the meeting today, economic development footprint. So I don't like to see decisions made in advance of committee considerations and discussions. And I think all governance are going to have to look very seriously at the creed of no duplication of services or studies. And I know that SCORE is very economic development driven, but this council is considering a new footprint later on in the meeting today. And I think those are some of the thoughts that have to be entertained on whether we renew membership or not.
I don't see other hands, so we have a motion before us. I'll call the vote.
I know, I'm sorry, Madam Warden. May I amend it to keep in the first part that about the direction to council to send this through the budget committee?
And that Middlesex County rejoin SCORE be stricken.
Be stricken.
Okay, so we need a seconder for that, please. Yes, second on the motion to amend the motion. So I have Councillor Smybert. We have to approve that then now. So I'll have to call a vote on that that change. So the motion now is that Middlesex County Council direct that the 2025 Middlesex County South Central Ontario Region membership be included in the 2025 Middlesex County budget. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So is there any?
Yeah, I would be prepared to support it if it said in the budget discussion, but not just
Okay.
in the budget.
Sorry, the printed I have doesn't have the for discussion, so the words for discussion should be added there. Okay. So now we need to vote on it. I will call the vote then on that amended sure. Do you want to repeat it?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. That Middlesex County Council direct that the 2025 Middlesex County South Central Ontario Region membership be included in the 2025 Middlesex County budget for discussion.
Is everyone clear on the wording then? I'll call the vote then. All in favor? And opposed? One. So it is 4-3 and it's carried. Did you say 5? Sorry, 5-4. I can't do math. 9. Okay. So it's still carried. Yes. Okay, so now we can vote on the newly worded amended motion. I'll call that vote then. All in favor?
So just to clarify that vote was just
To amend.
to amend it. Now we've agreed to amend it and now we're going to vote on the motion.
Yes. I don't think it was clear. Okay, is everyone clear what we're voting on? The amended motion is now going to be considered by council. I'll call the vote on that. Everyone agreeing, voting in favor. Please raise your hands. So we've got 5. Okay. And opposed? And that is carried. It will be considered at the county budget meeting. Okay. Thank you for your patience. I'd like to extend my thanks as well for coming today and providing additional statistics and economic and historical information for us to consider. I guess it's fair to say stay tuned. Okay. Thank you. Yeah. Okay. So now there is a motion that with respect to the presentation that we just had, the motion before us, oops, I'm on the wrong page. The motion here it is. The motion before us is that the SCORE EDC member update 2024 be received for information. Councillor Grantham and Councillor Smybert, all in favor? And that is carried. Thank you. I see a question.
Yes, just on 9.A1.1, the correspondence from SCORE regarding a resolution for continued transit funding, is that still on the table or have we skipped all of that? Oh, you haven't got to that part.
That's the next item on
Oh,
our
I'm sorry.
agenda.
I thought you'd jump down to planning.
Okay. We were just receiving the presentation part, right? Okay, so we're on 9A1 now. Right? Okay, so we have correspondence from SCORE EDC regarding the request for the support of resolution for continued transit funding. And if council wishes to support this, then we have a motion before us. Okay, I see. Is this a question? Councillor Burkhart Jessen? Go ahead. Yeah.
No, I'm very supportive of this resolution. SCORE has done and SCT has done a great job in advocating for community transit. And I think that this resolution only strengthens the work that each member or each individual community transportation route or program is doing on their own. The more that MTO and the provincial government can hear that there needs to be an extension for funding for community transit, the better. So I would certainly be willing to put, I don't know whether we can pass this motion today or whether it goes at the next meeting, however procedurally it needs to be, but I'm happy to put it on the floor to get this motion moving.
Okay. Councillor Grantham?
And if we're allowed to do so, I would like to second that motion. I know the good work that it's done with our transit system in Strathroy Caradoc. So if you're looking for a second or your motion, Councillor, I will gladly second that motion.
I'll ask for question. Anyone having questions before I'll call the vote on the motion that's been moved and seconded? Go ahead, Councillor Clark.
This question through the warden might have been more appropriate for the people that just left, but I'll maybe ask the SCORE representatives that are here. When you look at the transit, it's not a cost recovery model by any stretch of the imagination. So we do rely on provincial and federal dollars. So to that end, what sort of overtures has SCORE made in possibly having, and not to pick on Amazon, but somebody like that, one of the big users, to contribute in some way to the funding model? Or any of the other employers that would be high users?
Yeah. So you're looking for like a private investment. And I can say that there hasn't been any meaningful discussions with that. I mean, I think that's certainly something that we could bring back to try to bolster support. what SCT does, it looks at, it's beyond just the 5 counties that are members of SCT. So anybody that has a regional or a community transportation program is part of this. And they're, collect all the data from all the routes and everything and, provide that to the province in order to get the support for the individual routes. Certainly Kara and Cindy can talk to their efforts. They, work with SCORE or SCT at a staff level with the exchange of data. But, SCT has really promoted the advocacy of community transportation and the connectivity. So the connectivity all the way from Middlesex all the way up to Grey Bruce. So they're all part of SCT, even though they're not members of SCORE. The SCT network is a much broader network.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else? I don't see any hands. We have a motion before us that's been moved and seconded. I'll call the vote. All in favor? Opposed? Seeing none, then that is carried. Now we can look to reports from county officers. The first item up today is a report from Dirk Vanderwerf, Director of Planning and Development. And Dirk's there. The floor is yours when you're ready.
Thank you, through the warden. Just a quick, if you indulge me with a few minutes, a quick update on just 3 items, a little bit about the ongoing provincial change, a bit of an update on how development activity is now that we're a little over halfway through the year, and then just talk at the end about resources. Next slide, please. So I've been before you before, talking about Bill 185. We're continuing to implement that. Just last night, actually, the province did release another ERO posting on additional residential units, and they're consulting on streamlining zoning further on that. So as much as it's done, it's still not done. The provincial planning statement, and that was just the actual document was on your last agenda, but the province, after consulting for a couple of years on it, we have a new document finally. So at least we know what we're working towards. It does have an impossible to implement effective date of October 20th. And all decisions, of course, we can't update all of our documents prior to that, but all decisions October 20th going forward must be consistent with the new PPS. In terms of the actual changes, and Abby Heddle-Jacobs would normally be here explaining this to you, and she's one of the people suffering from the September kids returning to school and get the whole house gets sick. So I'll do my best not to mess up her slides. But in terms of major changes to the PPS, the growth management policies have evolved, very similar to what was in the proposed document. They're allowing municipalities to project out as far as 30 years now. It was 20, then they had 25, so now it's 20 to 30. You are required to base it upon Ministry of Finance projections, which are released annually. And then the municipal comprehensive review requirements are, and I should say next slide, please. The MCR requirements are eliminated, and in its place is a less robust, but still you have to consider need, supply, your municipality's ability to service it, alternative locations, ag impact, and some new language that speaks to phased progression. So it's different, but there still is a policy test there for municipalities. Next slide, please. In terms of agriculture, we are required now to implement an agricultural systems approach, which before was only in the GGHA. And it's really about, we've been protecting the agricultural land base for a long time. This is expanding that policy framework to, for instance, a grain operation that might be in an urban area, trying to have policies that would protect it and its role that it undertakes in the agricultural system. So that's something new for us. Additional residential units, there's new language on that. And I mentioned even since this slide, there's new language on that as of last night. The lot creation policies, they did not carry forward with the 3 lots per farm that was in one of the early drafts. And so the only change they made is they added a few words to the surplus dwelling consents, which I think is an attempt to stop. Some municipalities were considering maybe we had multiple farms with a number of farm houses on it, severing all of them off. This now says 1 new residential lot per farm consolidation, though the details on that are still not that clear to me. Next slide, please. Employment lands, it does loosen the policies and allow municipalities to consider the conversion of employment lands, which were quite stringently protected before, to other uses. On the flip side, though, they also are requiring that land use changes near employment lands demonstrate or avoid or demonstrate that any impacts are mitigated. And of course, you see that a lot in the GGHA where residential development encroaches upon employment areas and starts to impact existing C of As, et cetera, for those larger uses. Next slide, please. A bit more of the same. Housing policies have evolved. The servicing, the hierarchy, they did make changes there. It still does at the very top recommend and seek full municipal services as the highest priority, but municipalities have options to consider some of the other forms. So next slide, looking forward. As I said, all decisions as of end of October must be consistent with the PPS. The province is consulting on a transition regulation, and it's, of course, as often is the case now, it's a pretty short consultation. So I did submit comments on behalf of the county. And essentially, I suggested some options, but my opinion and recommendation would be to approve, like we have a number of official plan amendments that are before the OLT right now, get everything approved, and then direct municipalities to do another implementation exercise to be consistent with the new PPS, as opposed to sort of holding everything up while this is all in flux. So we'll see what they do. That the comment period ends shortly. We will have to update the county's official plan, all of your local official plans, and your local zoning bylaws. And then the other thing that we've already had a number of consultations on it. So you're going to start to see these at the local level, which is developers now are able, both based on the PPS and the Bill 185 changes, developers are able to apply for settlement expansions on a one-off basis now. And so we are going to increasingly get those. And so those will be coming forward, and how we evaluate those staff, we're working a bit on that right now. So that's a very, next slide, please, very high level review of sort of the current round of provincial changes. In terms of development activity, I only included the one slide, but we've done numbers. Again, Abby put the numbers together for us, sort of just where we are past halfway through the year. And we're trending to be the same as last year, or very much in line with averages. There was some suggestion with the interest rate changes, and certainly building is down, but we're still seeing a lot of applications. The interesting thing, I have no explanation for this either, is the larger municipalities, your Middlesex Centre, Strathroy, Caradoc, Thames Centre, where of course we see most of our applications, they're seeing as a percentage less, and our smaller municipalities, like something like North Middlesex, is almost double what a normal year would be. And again, I have no explanation for that. It's still relatively, most applications are in Strathroy, Caradoc, and Middlesex Centre, of course, but it is, I find that interesting. And so we'll see how it is over the year, and then next year and going forward. Next slide, please. And then just to wrap up, in terms of resources, just a couple things to put on your radar. I mentioned the Bill 185, and it did include language which was amended by Cabinet in relation to who can make appeals and how existing appeals before the OLT are dealt with. The new language isn't as clear as the previous version. And in fact, of all the appeals that we have before the OLT right now, only one of them in Middlesex Centre has been dealt with under Bill 185. The rest are still up for discussion, I guess I would say, or interpretation. With our solicitors, we're making, and with local municipalities, we're making motions on those to try to move all of that forward. But it is not as clear as it perhaps could be. Add to that the complication of the updated provincial planning statement now, and the fact that it is likely going to be effective, and even the matters that are before the OLT now are likely going to be tested against the new PPS. So it's a completely different framework than what you considered, both at the local level and at the county level, what the OLT may be looking at. So we're working with our solicitors on that, sort of as we speak. But I can't overstate that it's a significant change. And it's just perhaps unfortunate timing. In terms of our solicitors, as you know, there is a transition going on in the county legal department. And so we have a number of very short deadlines as we approach our the next set of hearings. And so we have engaged outside solicitors, a couple of different firms, both trying where we can work with the same firm as a local municipality, in some cases not. to take those files forward. And then over time, we'll bring those files will be managed again in-house, but to make the immediate needs, we've undertaken that step. And then the last thing, this is something I'm very kind of positive on, if you will. I'm very, it's been a challenging few years about staffing and just bringing people on. So we've got a great group of people. And of course, I'm talking about planning. And so you see the planners at your local level, at your council chambers. But of course, we've got technicians, Teresa, that do all the work behind the scenes, that help them. And then of course, our Forster, who helps the planners with sort of environmental related questions. So we've got a great group. We've been able to augment our staff, bring on a couple of terrific young planners. And then the whole team are gaining experience and elevating. And of course, an important thing for us as planners is our RPP, or Registered Professional Planner designation. We had one staff member get that late last year. We've got 2 or 3 more that will get it this year. So I think it's just sort of a sign of bringing on people and then training and building their experience. So I am very positive on that. Council did in their last year's budget, allocate one more, give us the resources to hire one more person. We've done that and we're onboarding, we're bringing them up to speed. So with that, we are going to be in the next few months looking at the assignments of which planners are where. In the past, we basically had to do it out of necessity. We would lose someone and then we'd have to sort of shuffle all the decks to keep on the Titanic to keep everything going. So we're in a great position, in my view. We've got a full complement. We've got good people. We just have to align sort of the skill sets with the municipalities and with workload. We've developed sort of a matrix on how we're going to do that. So for instance, not move everyone at once. It has to be gradual. It has to account for knowledge transfer. We're looking at, for the larger municipalities, pairing an experienced planner with a less experienced planner. And so, different files, more difficult files, maybe the more experienced planner deals with while the other one is learning. So we've got a number of those things that we're sort of trying to implement. So we'll be reaching out to your CAOs, our staff, and everyone, and kind of working and rolling that out in the coming months. But as I said, it's kind of in a positive position where in the past we had to do these things. This is an opportunity to sort of right size the right people in the right location. So Madam Warden, very quick, but I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for that. I'll look to council then. I see Councillor Burkhart-Jessen, and I'll work from there. Thank you.
Great. And thanks through the warden. Thank you very much for that, Dirk. I know that this is an update that we have all been looking forward to and anticipating. So thanks for the overview. And I think you touched on it towards the end of your presentation, but I just, for my own mind, just want to be clear. So the current, MCRs and growth boundaries that are being challenged, I believe you felt that when they actually go to hearing, or when the tribunal actually has them in front of them, I think they're going to be challenged against the current, like the new PPS, the October 20th PPS. I think that's what I heard, but I guess my question is what does happen to those MCRs and growth boundaries that are in appeal at the moment?
Through the warden. That is, again, we're working with our solicitors on this, and to be honest, there is not yet no one has done this yet, hasn't been tested yet at the OLT, but we believe that that's the direction that they're moving, that the effective date will be the October. So the hearings are going to be after October. And so therefore it will be considered against that, with the caveat that I did say that the province are consulting on transition provisions. And so we have commented on that about the complications of existing appeals. And so they have an opportunity, or they may address that through those transition provisions. So it's a little bit of a uncertainty. Well, it's a significant uncertainty.
I saw your hand, Councillor McMillan.
Yes, thanks very much, Dirk. And through the warden, could you provide us a wee bit of clarification on the ARUs? I'm thinking it's 4 in urban areas. Have any of the regulations changed in terms of ARUs, urban versus rural, or even on farm properties? Do you have any information about that? And I have one other question after that.
I will start with, Abby's going to put together kind of we call them green papers, but an internal document that sort of explains the differences. Because it's complicated. So ARUs are basically 3 units now. The 4 units, which is commonly cited in the media, relates to the larger urban centers that receive federal funding through the Housing Accelerator Fund. That's one of the requirements that they move, generally is one of the requirements that they move to 4 units. I believe the province has retained the 3 units. There's sort of 3 categories. There's in fully serviced areas, it's allowed as of right. Then there's urban areas that aren't, and then there's ag areas, agricultural areas, and the rules are a little bit different in each of those. And then, as I mentioned, the ERO environmental registry posting last night, it is, and I've only read it once. I believe it is looking at those as of right permissions and consulting on sort of standardized zoning. I think one of the concerns of some builders is that municipalities have to allow ARUs, but you still have setbacks that are different in every municipality and you know, those sort of things. And so it looks like they're trying to streamline that. My read of it, again, initial read is that it would be, if they were to proceed this way, it would be mandatory for those fully serviced areas. And then they have some language where municipalities could adopt it for those other areas, like agricultural areas where it's not mandatory. And I think the reason that they haven't made it mandatory everywhere is just servicing. You can imagine in a very small Crampton or somewhere where maybe just some lots just don't have enough room for a septic bed to accommodate 3 units. So I think that's why they've shied away from making it mandatory everywhere.
Thanks, Dirk, and that certainly would apply in town center. The other question that I have in doing a little bit of reading, I noticed there was a comment about the use it or lose it. If that were the case, when does the clock start ticking? Is it with once the new PPS has received royal assent after the 20th of October? Or does it go back to when the original application was? Because I understand that the province wants housing to move along. So just interested in your comments regarding that.
The Warden, it hasn't been tested yet, but I think that it would be from the date of the new PPS being in place. But there also is a requirement on the Planning Act that the municipality, I forget the term of it, a bylaw that deals with it. So I think you're going to have to examine that very soon with your engineering consultants or whoever gives you that advice and put that in place. So I think it's the companion of the 2 things together. So without the bylaw, I don't know that you can do it yet.
Let's look, Councillor Clark.
Yes, through the warden to Dirk, just sort of to piggyback on Councillor McMillan's question there, just for my own clarification. So a severance of a surplus farm dwelling in an agricultural setting, we're going to be restricted to 1 per farming operation, correct?
That's what the words now say.
Okay, so, and as a follow-up, so if people had surplus farm dwellings and they submitted the application before the 20th, then they would be under the old rules, correct?
It's a really interesting question because of the, again, barring the province releasing additional transition provisions. The way it's worded today, it will be the date that actually the matter is considered. Like if you make an application today and it's not, the council's not dealing with it until December, my understanding is you'll have to be consistent with the new PPS.
Okay, to more a personal comment, it's kind of short-sighted because anyone who's farming, they're not wanting to be landlords. So there's a lot of rural housing stock that is good housing stock, but to be quite frank, it's not the lane of business that the average farmer's in. So I think it's always better to have landowners in rural Ontario that are invested in the property and maintain them to a higher standard. And that's just a personal comment.
Is there anyone else? I don't see any hands, so thank you for that report. And the motion before us is that the planning and development update be received for information. Councillor Smybert and Councillor Burkhart-Jessen, all in favor? And that's carried. Thank you. Alrighty, and now we can move to the procurement services update. We're going to have Josh White, Procurement Services Manager, give that report. The floor is yours when you're ready, Josh.
Through the warden to council, good afternoon. Now that the procurement services department's reaching 2 years in existence, I thought it'd be a good idea to give an update as to what we've been up to, where we're going, and then because it's a relatively new department, give you guys all a little highlight of what we're responsible for and how we help the county and subsequently the lower tier municipalities out doing. So if you want to go to the first slide, through grant funding from the province of Ontario through the Municipal Modernization Program, the county retained LXM Law LLP via RFP to conduct a study on the procurement landscape at both the county and lower tier municipalities. LXM presented the findings of that study in February 2022, highlighting the recommendation for a centralized procurement department, not just at the county, but ultimately to support the lower tier municipalities as well for a number of reasons, which we'll get into. Next slide. So my position, the procurement services manager, was brought on in very late 2022. So 2023 was really our first year of the program. 2023 was more, at least initially, of a feeling out process. I came in from a couple of other lower tier municipalities and had my ways of going about things. And up to that point, county staff handled the procurements that they were assigned on their own. Meetings took place between myself and all the purchasing authorities to go over their processes, ways they feel like procurement at the county could be improved, and as well as education as to how procurement services could help them. Going through the process, you'll see a couple of things that we really focused on. There's 28 bids that were completed in 2023. Big consolidation was a big one. There was one instance where we were going out to RFP tender 13 times for lawn cutting services. We consolidated that into one, and that was on a yearly basis. As well as we extended the terms of those for 3 years, mostly to get cost certainty and more competitive pricing, as well as, again, the education of all staff as to our bylaw and how to follow it. Following that, our bylaw began to be developed as we saw procurement take place over and over again. We started to get a better feel of how the bylaw worked, how it didn't, and what was the best course of action going forward, which of course county legal had a hand in as well. So come 2024, you can see with 3 months ago, we have already 27 bids. Actually, since the time that I have provided this template, we're up to 28, which meaning, our service is getting utilized. Funny enough, with the bylaw being approved, we thought that maybe the workload would go down a little bit because we gave staff the ability to go out for 3 quotes for purchases up to $100,000 as opposed to 50. But we're finding that even for when 3 quotes are necessary, staff are still engaging procurement services, which we're fully supportive of because they're just appreciative of our help and the services that we can offer them. As you can see there, the other highlights is that the bylaw was being approved. With the bylaw being approved, we started to look at our procurement documents because we were referencing policies within our bylaw now, as well as the hiring of the procurement officer, which I will get into shortly. We have just started to support some of the lower tier municipalities, and I think our first bid for that is going out sometime this week too. So we're excited about that. Next slide. So our value proposition or a benefit. First and foremost, it's listed in our bylaw right on the first page. If not the first page, the second page is achieve best value for taxpayer dollars. When you think of procurement, you think of competitive bid process and driving price down, which we certainly do. My first foray into procurement 15 years ago was actually in the private sector. It was for one of the major banks in Canada, and we would collaborate with other large institutions. And one of the best practices we came up was through a study showing that just putting a bid out on a competitive procurement document lowered prices by 15%. So anytime that the county or any of the lower tier municipalities can somehow put out a quote tender if the time allows it, even the 3 quotes, there's some tangible savings that are available to you. But when we talk about best value, it's not just best price. We want to get the most qualified services or high quality goods in as possible. So we've put a big focus with the help of our department heads into developing appropriate requirements to ensure that we're getting the right product and services. You'll see examples of this being important when we're doing tenders and quotations where we're awarding bids on low compliant price. When we have a contractor who participates and comes in as the low bidder, if they're not necessarily skilled as we're looking for, with the language in our documents to ensure that our requirements and our experience required is correct. It gives us grounds to disqualify them in the natures of that business. And then also to improve efficiency. So we're like any department within finance, let's say payroll, accounts payable, receivable, ITS. We're subject matter experts in our field. I've done 500 of these. You're not necessarily needing to have your department heads worry about writing procurement documents, putting it together, managing bids and tenders, going through the question process, managing site visits, and then ultimately debriefs. It's a time saver for your staff to have us out there helping you. So in terms of our responsibilities, I've touched on these slightly, so I won't go through all of them. Administration adherence to a bylaw, that's what we all follow when we are making our purchases. Facilitating the procurement process. So the purchasing method, I mentioned quotes, tenders, requests for proposals, and buying groups. Buying groups were a pretty big topic a few years ago. They certainly have their place and purpose. I'm talking about items such as canoe procurement. I think most people have heard of through LAS. OECM is another large public sector procurement purchasing group, as well as EMOP, which is Elgin, Middlesex, Oxford procurement initiative. So we take part in all of those and look for opportunities to use them when requested, but by all means, if we have the opportunity to do a full-fledged tender request for proposal, we're looking to do that whenever possible. Other ones I'll highlight: vendor identification. That's not just for looking for people to participate in our bids and tenders. Oftentimes our department just gets asked for lower value purchases who can, potentially provide this service. We have access to all those purchasing groups, which I mentioned, which we can help identify vendors for, as well as we're members of the Ontario Public Buyers Association. So if we haven't heard of anybody who would do a particular good or service, we have about 500 other members that may have come across that before. And aside from that, you can see the other components of managing the procurement process: the site visits, the demonstrations, the interviews, and the negotiations, and then ultimately the contract development and execution. Another item of our benefit is mitigating risk. Again, there are various trade agreements that procurement is responsible for adhering to. The Canadian Free Trade Agreement, the Comprehensive Economic Trade Agreement, which is Canada and Europe, as well as any legal precedent. We have legal services at the county to assist us in navigating that, as well as being part of the Ontario Public Buyers Association. We have access to some of the best procurement lawyers through national firms through that agency as well. And then just through best practices being as part of the network. Okay, and then vendor management. So this is a major part of our role that we provide. When I first started into public procurement about 8 years ago, debriefs took place, I would imagine, close to 1 out of 10% of the time, in terms of unsuccessful vendors asking us to go over the rationale as to why they were not successful. Through, I guess, industry best practices in the private sector, where they're all looking to put their best foot forward, as well as wanting to understand why they're not successful. When we issue an RFP, it's close to 90% of the vendors now asking for debriefs, which you can imagine is quite a bit of time to correlate a report card for them and present it to them in a tangible way. So what's next? So further to Alex Blah's recommendations, a procurement officer was hired in July 2024 with the intention of providing procurement services to all lower-tier municipalities once fully on board. So as I said, we're already going down that path with the support for a couple of lower-tier municipalities, and we're beginning to reach out to more. I'm expecting that in early 2025, our services will be offered to all of the lower-tier municipalities. This is on the levy, so there will be no rates charged. So I encourage you to utilize our services whenever possible. And we'll be reaching out and going to meet with each of the lower tiers towards the end of 2024. So hopefully we can get everybody on board, because there's a whole foray of reasons why that would be a good thing, both for the county and for each of the lower tiers. Next slide, please. So additional future and potential initiatives, as I kind of mentioned, as we're gearing up to support the lower tiers, we're going to be looking at bylaw revisions and amendments where required, just because we're all potentially working together. It just makes sense for our bylaws to be relatively similar. In the procurement field, everything's relatively standard. I imagine the big differences here would be the dollar thresholds as to when something needs to go out to competitive procurement. Educating, much as I described, as we did here with the county and MLPS. Bid templates, again, just efficiency. We're all going to be working together. It'd be nice that everybody use the exact same template, so we all understand what exactly we're dealing with. Online bidding, I could not emphasize this enough from a risk mitigation perspective, as well as achieving best value. As much as we can get our lower tier municipalities on online bidding, we will look at that option. We'll also look at the option. We know one of the big concerns with some of our smaller lower tier municipalities, or all of them, I guess it would hold true, is that smaller companies find the cost of online bidding a little too steep, and we may need to look at a situation where we're doing predominantly online bidding, but when there's local business participations, that we would be doing it offline, as well as potentially looking at other existing vendors that could perform the services at a more reasonable price for those smaller businesses. And then contract templates. Just as we're working together, we want to be using the same contracts and sort of streamlining that. And we will be working with our partners in legal services to kind of come up with that template. Sort of mention another benefit of working with the lower tier municipalities is identifying common purchases. So the first tender that we're about to release is for something that we actually currently have on the market right now. So there would have been the opportunity to work together to improve our economy of scales and hopefully savings for both the county and lower tier municipalities. As we kind of get into or go down the road of supporting the lower tier municipalities, we'll get a better understanding of what everybody is purchasing on an annual basis. And hopefully we'll be able to consolidate all those bids together to further drive savings and efficiency. Centralized vendor reference database. So actually our county engineer and some of the engineers of the lower tier municipalities have kind of brought this up in their own world. I think it would be an excellent idea just across the county and lower tier municipalities to have a centralized reference database, so that when we are going out for tender and RFP, we'd be able to disqualify or check on vendors based on somebody else within the county utilizing that company, as opposed to just the 3 that they list as their references. Shared professional roster. So I've done basically roster shortlists for engineers, consultants, architects, things of that nature, whether that's done just at the county level or throughout the municipalities. It's an option there to kind of streamline services and make things easier and more efficient for each municipality to use. And shared contractor programs, which kind of goes along the same way, electricians, plumbers, excavators, things of that nature that we can all kind of utilize and hopefully enjoy some savings with. So aside from that, like I mentioned, we'll be reaching out to the lower tier municipalities to offer our support in the upcoming months, and hopefully this is fully onboarded in early 2025, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Fulsome report. Thank you, Joss. I will look to now council members for questions. Councillor Smyberg.
Yep, through the warden. To you, Josh. Sounds like you're doing some amazing things with procurement. I had a couple of questions for you. Does the county currently have a software system that you're using for your procurement?
Through the warden to the councillor. Yes, we're currently using bids and tenders. And as we kind of foray into this, I know our contract with bids and tenders is coming up in June. We'd have to look at each one of the lower tier municipalities to see when their contracts are ending. We may go out for our RFP and take a look at everybody and involve each of the municipalities to see what's available and what options are out there. But yes, we are currently using our own bidding system. And then another thing we would need to look at is whether everything just funnels to the county and we label it for each municipality, or do we have a bit of bidding software at each municipality that the county's logging into and providing support. So.
Thank you. Just one other question, if I could. You talked about LAS, and I was just kind of curious, how often do you use Canoe, and have you had some success with that?
Yes, through the warden to the councillor. So they are very useful. They do have their place, I would say. The pros of it is for kind of small reoccurring purchases. ITS uses OECM, or they may even use LAS for their laptops. Office supplies, things of that nature. They're great. The prices are on there and they're very quick. There's two cons that I find with them. One is for larger purchases, machinery. For example, we actually tested this at my old municipality. We went out for a piece of equipment for our landfill. And as we were developing specifications, our department head went to the dealership, looked at a specific model, tried it out, was trying to be sold the piece of equipment by just going through the purchasing group, and was given a price. We had a little bit of time and leeway, so we ultimately decided to issue a tender, indicating that, you know, if the successful respondent wanted us to participate in a purchasing program to get a particular price, we'd be happy to do so. The exact same dealer offered the exact same machinery for about 20% less. So when you look at these lists, if the pricing is clear and transparent, which some of it is, I think it's a wonderful product. But if you get into these larger purchases where it simply just says 10% off MSRP and you go on the website, you can't see what MSRP is, you really don't know what that is until you test the market. So that's kind of where I say and you know, the reoccurring purchases, it's useful. But if there is time to do a full-fledged tender or RFP, I would recommend it. And then the other thing to consider too is that these programs are generally larger scale. So the small businesses within local municipalities aren't typically even asked to participate. So although we can't technically discriminate and say we'd only award to lower businesses or local businesses, we definitely want their participation, and some of those programs definitely exclude them. You're welcome.
Councillor Mayhew.
Yeah, thank you very much, Madam Warden. Boy, the last words that you uttered a few seconds ago are very comforting to me, because my question was, some of the smaller trades in the local municipalities are left out of the tendering process. And I'm sure we've all experienced in the past that tendering doesn't necessarily get you the cheapest price or the most quality of workmanship. That very often trades within our municipalities that we know and appreciate and have the skill level that are required sometimes are left out of that tendering process. And I hope there can be some mechanics that allow those smaller corporations to participate in this endeavor. But thank you.
Anyone else? I don't see any hands. In that case, thank you for that report, Josh. And we have a motion before us that the procurement services update be received for information. If I could have a mover, please. Councillor Robb, Councillor Clark, all in favor? And that is carried. Thank you. Okay, moving on to action items. Nick Kazakov is project manager from Urban Metrics, is now going to give us an update on the Middlesex County Economic Development Corporation strategy. Welcome, gentlemen. Thank you for coming. I'm going to turn my speaker off, and then if you turn yours on, you can go ahead with your presentation.
Good afternoon, Madam Warden and members of council. My name is Peter Thoma. I'm the partner in charge and president of Urban Metrics. I'm delighted to be here today to having gone through a process which Josh oversaw to bring us to this table. But we're delighted to be here to provide the results of our findings related to the question of a potential alternative to the way economic development happens in the county. And I think this is quite a timely discussion based on some of the other items that were on this agenda. So I'm actually a planner and land economist. And I'm joined by my colleague, Nick Kazakov, who's actually a professional economic development practitioner, and I'm going to pass the torch to Nick, and happy to answer any questions as we go forward.
Great. Thank you, Peter. And it's a pleasure to be here. And I think first off, we'd like to also thank the project committee from the county, Tara, Paul, as well as Carolyn Tripp from North Middlesex and Michael DeLulo from Middlesex Center, who helped us through, got us through the process and provided their insights as we went through this project. Next slide, please. So what we'd like to do today is really just highlight the approach we took through this strategy, as well as how we got to the recommended approach. As we hope you've had an opportunity to review the strategy, which was provided in the council package. So ultimately, this report really looks at weighing the different economic development models currently in place, which is the internal delivery model within the county, and then weighing the options and the feasibility of exploring adopting an economic development corporation model, which is also a similar or a familiar model in Ontario for many lower tier as well as county level municipalities delivering economic development services. Next slide, please. So the approach we took was over the beginning in late spring of this year, we conducted a background review looking at the current county economic development model, as well as the landscape for as economic development corporations across Ontario, as well as the different functions of member municipalities in economic development efforts. We then moved on to a benchmarking exercise that compared Middlesex County to neighboring municipalities with their economic development delivery efforts. And then we had an extensive engagement phase, which included many of you around this table from member municipalities, as well as economic development ecosystem partners, which currently interact with both the internal economic development department, as well as the county's business community and entrepreneur network, which then ultimately resulted in a deliverable and a strategy providing a recommended approach, which we'll go through from a purpose and function right down to performance metrics, branding, and office space. Next slide, please. So our background review first started with a review of the current county economic development model. And it really established to us that the county had established this internal department 9 years ago and has provided a full suite of economic development services that has benefited the entire county and its member municipalities, and it's recognized across the economic development industry as a leading economic development delivery model. However, we also consulted with senior leadership and identifying issues that are generally seen to be the main encumbrance on the department's ability to deliver greater economic impact. First and foremost, it was identified that the county's low industrial tax base and a lack of service industrial land is inhibiting economic growth currently, and the potential of looking to an economic development corporation could help support rising industrial tax base and attracting new investment. It was also identified that there has been an issue of staff retention at the department level, as similar EDO roles are competing with other jurisdictions and be able to retain them. So there's been a retention issue. Next, there's a challenge of delivering a large portfolio of services within the economic development department with the current allocated resources. And then finally, there was also the challenge and identified a lack of dedicated office space within the county, and that lack of visible presence for the business community and stakeholders to access the services provided by the economic development department. Next, we looked at the Middlesex County Economic Development Corporation. The county currently has an economic development corporation that has been incorporated. It was established in 2018 to facilitate a land transaction. However, under the Municipal Act and how the corporation was structured, it provides the full suite of economic development services that can be provided under the Act. And reviewing the documents and speaking with senior leadership, it was understood that can be easily reactivated and operationalized with the ability to transfer the current model over to an economic development model if so desired. And then finally, from the background review, we looked at the member municipalities' economic development efforts, and we looked at a variety of factors of who is responsible for economic development at the lower tier, the boards and other initiatives from CIPs to land and so forth. And it was recognized that only a handful of municipalities have dedicated full-time economic development staff allocated to them, and which further reinforced the current county-wide approach to economic development, be it in an internal department model or in an economic development corporation model. Next slide, please. We then looked at the Economic Development Corporation landscape in Ontario to understand what other jurisdictions have. So we identified approximately 20 local or county level economic development corporations that are operating in Ontario, which serve as the lead economic development agency for their respective jurisdiction. And we use this to then, we highlighted 5 in particular, and you can see there's a strong concentration here in southwestern Ontario, both from either at a county level or even a single tier level. We looked at their organizational structure, their governance structure, focus and mandate, their core funding model, performance metrics, and their services provided. It's important to note here that a lot of these, particularly in the cases of Sarnia-Lambton Economic Partnership, is a county-led economic development organization funded by the county. However, there's also lower tier activity in the lower tier municipalities with EDO officers, as well as a separate tourism function. And that goes for also Invest Windsor Essex, as well as Huron County. Next slide, please. So we conducted a benchmarking exercise, which looked at a comparative analysis of Middlesex County's internal economic development department and measured against 4 other economic development delivery models in Ontario, with your neighboring London Economic Development Corporation, the Sarnia-Lambton Economic Partnership, St. Thomas Economic Development Corporation, and then also Perth County, which has a similar internal department function. And we looked at the functions, the number of lower tier municipalities it may serve, the staff complement provided to each one of them, as well as the budgets allocated to each. And we recognize that from a per capita basis, as well as a per business case, Middlesex County is more on the lower side on the funding, and also on a staffing side compared to its neighboring economic development departments and neighboring municipalities, which then, however, their budgets also expressed or warranted that it could be considered that there's a shift to a economic development corporation model, and it was feasible to explore that further. Next slide, please. So we then went into an engagement exercise with member municipalities. We held one-on-one or roundtable discussions, individual roundtable discussions with each of the lower tier municipalities, which consisted of members of council as well as senior leadership from each. And we had a series of standardized questions which really weighed both the current model and a potential economic development corporation model. And first and foremost, on the current model, it was recognized that the county's economic development staff are well valued and are seen to be a great resource and facilitate meaningful connections. However, there was an overall consensus that the current model needs to change in order to create greater economic impact. A few of the issues that were flagged included the limited funding, recognition that there's a limited funding for a large portfolio of services. There was a demand for further direct communication between the department and the lower tier municipalities. There was also identified that there was confusion for the array of development for the department services offered, as well as there's not a misunderstanding of performance metrics or they're being unknown. And on the flip side, for the current model, particular improvements or additions to the department if the department chose the current model to continue, required more visibility in the county, looking for having dedicated sector specialization and expertise, particularly in key sectors such as agriculture, manufacturing, and tourism, an increased and more formalized communications with member municipalities, and an updated strategic plan and economic visioning for the county. And when we looked from the Economic Development Corporation model, member municipalities saw the creation of an EDC in principle is considered the right direction forward for the county. When we looked at what should be the primary objectives of an EDC, it should really revolve around a shared vision for the county, focusing on core business functions that will drive new investment and growth, particularly diversifying the tax base and generating more jobs within the county. In terms of the functions that the EDC should support or should focus on, is primarily four would be business retention and expansion, investment attraction and FDI, small business and entrepreneurship support services, as well as tourism. It was also recognized that the EDC requires dedicated space to help facilitate its interactions with the county business community. From an anticipated challenges in shifting to an economic development corporation model, including getting buy-in from across the county and funding the EDC adequately and fairly. Next slide, please. We also then conducted a workshop with the economic development ecosystem, and these are partners from industry associations, the CFDCs, workforce planning board, tourism organizations, and other small business centers and other partners that currently work with the economic development department. And the insights we gained from them were, if the current model remained, they saw the ecosystem department believe the county's current economic development and tourism efforts to be effective in terms of impacting growth in the economy. In terms of what the ecosystem partners valued is the collaborative nature and support of the department and the department staff's accessibility and responsiveness, and the department always seeking new opportunities. In terms of challenges that ecosystem partners saw in the current model, was particularly came down to municipal politics and the allocated budget and resources currently allocated to the current model. In terms of things that they would like to see changed, would be with the current model would be increasing the county's active capacity and activity in local municipalities, increased support and collaboration with businesses and key sectors, as well as exploring different different organizational structural model, exploring particularly the Chatham-Kent model, which uses a geographical delivery model of its county staff. And then on the Economic Development Corporation side model, ecosystem partners were not opposed to seeing the county exploring the option in a different economic development and tourism delivery model that would better serve the needs of the local economy. The primary objectives that they saw were similar to those that member municipalities would be focusing on continued collaboration and partnership in pursuit of investment and job growth across the county, and same in terms of the functions, particularly focus on business retention and expansion, as well as investment attraction and FDI. Some partners even indicated that there would be interest in even co-locating in physical space with an EDC to better serve the business community, and also saw that having an EDC model may provide better opportunities for partnership and collaboration compared to the current internal department model. Next slide, please. So based on the background review and comparative analysis, as well as the engagement results that we conducted through this process, the recommended approach would be to shift the county's economic development department function to a fully autonomous Middlesex County Economic Development Corporation, or operationalizing the current corporation that the county and the corporation is currently the sole shareholder in. So the model is on the left, which has Middlesex County as the as a sole shareholder. Then followed below with the Middlesex County Economic Development Corporation Board of Directors, which would then have a executive director with a staff complement of 5. And then also, as we have on the box on the right, would look for opportunities from Middlesex County Administration Support Services, from payroll, IT, HR, or legal, which could be which would be required to be confirmed. However, this is a common practice in many other economic development corporations using services from their member municipality. Then we provided a defined purpose and function for the corporation. The purpose would be to lead, develop, and coordinate Middlesex County's economic development strategic plan and efforts in collaboration with member municipalities and interested parties. And it would really be to take on the lead role in economic development, delivery, and services for the county and on behalf of the county. And based on the engagement and discussions, the 3 core functions of the corporation would be business development, split between business retention and expansion, as well as investment traction services. Maintaining the tourism and destination marketing organization function, as we understand that was previously explored of separating. However, based on the size and scope of the tourism offering in Middlesex County, it would be better feasible to be held within an economic development corporation and held and using shared services. And finally, providing strategic initiatives and advocacy on behalf of the county for economic development and services. Next slide, please. And then finally, and we looked further into the recommended approach. We provide, based on best practices of the other economic development corporations that we looked at across Ontario, we provided an organizational structure of three types. First, is alignment by industry, so having staff within the corporation focus on individual industries of your key sectors, particularly agriculture, manufacturing, tourism. The second option would be a local geography, having 2 economic development officers split the geography of the county in 2 and serving the member municipalities. And then finally, a third option, aligning by function. So having an individual solely based for business retention expansion, another for investment attraction, another for tourism. And that would be also then supported by a communications and marketing person as well, and as a min who would be managed by an executive director. In terms of an EDC board composition, the current Middlesex Economic Development Corporation has all members of council I believe are members of the board. Looking at best practices of other economic development corporations, they usually are more swayed towards the business community and have business representation and up to about 15 members. Here, we've made a recommendation to amend the EDC bylaw to include citizen directors and limit up to 3 council directors on the EDC board of directors. And we go further into recommendations based on comparable EDC size and makeup, as well provide key criteria for selecting board members. In terms of the EDC funding model, EDCs are primarily funded by their municipal shareholder, and usually that core funding does come from the shareholder. The EDC core funding is dependent on the county funding the EDC in the amount of approximately $900,000 to $1.3 million annually to operate. This is based on a per capita and basically in the mid-range of what we saw from the comparative analysis. Also, additional sources of funding include fees for services, federal and provincial grants, and private sector funding and sponsorships. However, most of those are only applicable to economic development corporations that have core funding already allocated to them. And it was recognized that current county staff and department have done a great job of securing funding, but there could be more opportunities and more effort in the economic development corporation model to secure additional funding. From a performance measurements perspective, the EDC would be evaluated on activities related to its core functions, looking at business development, tourism, and marketing and communications from an activities perspective. And we've laid out a variety of them in the report, and also associated reporting tools that would provide accountability and transparency between the EDC and the county, as the county would be the sole shareholder in the Economic Development Corporation. We also looked at branding and marketing. From a naming perspective, branding, the corporation is currently named the Middlesex County Economic Development Corporation, and that's certainly in line with many others across Ontario, and aligns with the recommended direction of the organization. Currently the county also has the Invest Middlesex and Visit Middlesex brands, which we see should migrate to the EDC and could be further amplified using best practices in marketing to amplify those messaging. And then finally, we also looked at the requirement for office space, and this was heard throughout the engagement. And the EDC would require dedicated office space for its operations. And currently, it was identified that the current office situation is suboptimal and lacks presence within the county. However, it was recognized, as mentioned, there's other ecosystem partners that would like to explore the options of also co-locating to providing almost a business center type facility, potentially. And with that, it provides kind of an overview of the strategy that was provided, and we'd be happy to take any questions at this time.
Thank you, Nick. That was a really concise, there's a lot of content in there to get your head around, but that was a really good presentation. I will look now to councillors to ask questions. See the hands flying. I'll start over here and then I'll go there. Go ahead, councillor.
Thank you, Madam Warden, and thank you very much for the presentation. There's no shortage of data, the importance of small business plays in employment in our country. Canadian Federation of Independent Business, National or Retail Council of Canada, Chamber of Commerce, they all have numbers that indicate the quantity and quality and the importance it has in our economy. In this industry sector, or are they being considered in this that independent business sector? I looked at industry sector. I see industry, manufacturing, tourism, communication, but that retail and restaurant component, is that in there? And furthermore to that, it as well as being a large employer, large investor on our main streets. Many of those main streets are county roads, and a lot of these communities, and I can think of, Glencoe, Middlesex Center, Strathroy. Sometimes the business community don't feel like they have autonomy over their own main street because we don't, not to dismiss the cooperation, the good cooperation we have from the county. But there often is a fragility to these business communities. And have they been forgotten in this, or are they going to be part of the overall outlook and how we can remediate shortcomings and enhance that sector of the economy?
Thank you through Madam Warren, to you, Councillor. Yes, absolutely. I think that was certainly considered, and would be included. I think the role of the Economic Development Corporation would be to enhance the activities currently provided through the local municipalities and through kind of shifting the functions that Kara and her team provide already to the Middlesex business community as a whole.
Councillor Ropp, you had your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. Through the warden, my comments are much the same as my colleagues. I do like the idea of the composition of that board with 3 councillors and I believe it's 12 citizen appointees. But I do agree with the councillor that the makeup of those citizens will decide how successful it is. And I think that's going to be the important part to it. But there's a lot of information that I'm going to have to read through a couple more times, but I appreciate very much the presentation today.
Other councillors? Kara, is there anything you'd like to add?
Thank you, Madam Warden, to the council. First of all, thank you for the direction that was given by council to go through this process and the support of the council and senior leadership in terms of developing this. And thank you as well to the committee who has had a part in this from day one. And my thanks, of course, to Peter and Nick for all of the work that they have done, which has been considerable. And I know that the information before you is considerable in terms of what is included in this report. To the earlier question and comments of the council members, as you know, over 90% of the businesses here in Middlesex County are considered small in the nature of the definition provided by upper levels of government, but they are not small in terms of the services delivered to them and with them in partnership in our economic development function. And so they are included, and they are included in every sector of the economy that we capitalize on, whether that be in tourism, whether that be in manufacturing, and certainly whether that be in agriculture. They are included in every single thing that we do, and they are the largest part of the industry that we serve. I was delighted through this process to learn of our partner engagement and input with respect to their desire for us to work even closer with our local municipalities. We share an amazing relationship with your staff and appreciate everything that they are able to bring to the table. We have certainly worked together with them on issues such as community improvement plans and the like that foster increased investment in your communities, as well as the commercial attraction piece that we're going through right now, as well as many other things that we're working on together. And I was also delighted through this process to learn from our small business and entrepreneurship support services that they are looking to foster an even greater relationship with our department to serve those that they are able to through other levels of funding. For example, community futures corporations, for example, the small enterprise centers. So there's a lot of opportunity, and I just want to appreciate the fact that those questions have come forward and to advise that they certainly are being considered in this. But above all, thank you for the direction of council. Thank you for the leadership, and thank you to Urban Metrics for all the work they've done to date.
Councillor Grantham?
Yeah, thank you, Warden. Mine is more towards the recommendation that's in front of us. It asks for implementation strategy during the 2025 budget deliberations. Do I take that to read that it will be presented to the budget committee first before council, or is it to come to council first? Just for clarity on the recommendation that's in front of us.
Carrie, would you like to speak to that?
Through you, Warden, to council, it's a great question. Thank you for bringing it forward. The intent of this resolution is to bring forward a plan with respect to the bones of what would be included, the time frame that would be included, and any budgetary considerations to be brought forward during budget committee as we are approaching that time of year. The intention is not for an implementation plan to be presented to budget that would not be considered then by council. This is simply in terms of the structure of what an implementation plan would look like and what it would cost.
Yeah, I would struggle with that. I would ask that implementation strategy come to council first before it go to the budget committee. That just is my issue with the recommendation in front of us. I would like to see council as a whole have a look at it, and any questions that council as a whole may have. I'm okay with the implementation strategy. I just would like council as a whole to see it first.
Sorry, do you have a Councillor Clark?
Yeah, no, I'll make the motion that council direct staff to bring Board of Middlesex County Economic Development Corporation implementation strategy, the council as a whole.
And I'll second. I'll second that.
The clerk is going to read back the motion before we ask for seconders and some action.
That the Middlesex County Economic Development Corporation strategy presentation be received for information, and that County Council direct staff to bring forward a Middlesex County Economic Development Corporation implementation strategy to council as a whole.
I heard you say yes, that's what you want. So I have a seconder as well, Councillor Clark. Is that a question? I'll look to Councillor Burkhart-Jessen.
Okay, and thanks to the warden. So just so I'm clear, the implementation strategy essentially is the price tag for moving ahead with this. So that really, it's not the implementation strategy. We have to approve the price tag. And once we approve the price tag, then we get the strategy, which then would come to council. So with that in mind, I still think that the recommended motion is the way to go, because we have to approve funding the strategy. It's not going to be like what's coming to budget is not the strategy. Essentially, it would be the piece to pay for coming up with what that strategy looks like.
I don't mind the clarity on that, Councillor. That's the clarity.
If that's if you can understand what I said, that's my interpretation of this recommended motion.
Did you want to?
To the counselor, Councillor Burkhart-Jessen, your interpretation is correct, that what would be brought forward with respect to this resolution would be the costing and the time frame required for the implementation plan, not the actual implementation itself that would come to council.
So can I just have follow up? So with that in mind, that's the motion I can support. Unfortunately, Councillor Grantham, I can't support the motion that you put on the floor.
Councillor Clark, comments?
Yeah, so just for clarification, if we start with the chicken and the egg kind of thing, the egg, and say, in principle, is everyone around the horseshoe in support of this? I think that's possibly where, not to put thoughts in Councillor Grantham's mind, but is everybody in support of this in principle? And then we move to the next stage. Can we afford it? And B, how do we implement that? I guess that's where I'm thinking.
Councillor Grantham, and then I'll see.
Yeah, no, just my concern is no matter the wording, that there's an appearance that once it goes to the budget committee, it's halfway there, right? Now, that's just my point, is that I would like council as a whole to see the number first, say we would like to send it to the budget committee. It's just, to me, Councillor Burkhart, just the impression that once it goes to budget committee, it's halfway towards approval without council as a whole seeing. And I will concede about the strategy, because it does read, implementation strategy. That's what the motion in front of us did read.
Councillor McGuire.
Thank you, Madam Warden. I'm still remain hesitant about the whole concept. I was asked the other day by somebody in our community what exactly this would be, and I can't answer them. Maybe I'm not understanding it. Maybe the information is in front of me, but I can't tell them exactly what this is. I heard the presentation. I've read it a number of times, and I still can't tell them exactly how it works with each municipality that makes up the county on all of these issues. It seems to me like, we're talking about delegating a great deal of authority that currently sits with elected people to an independent corporation, which always troubles me when municipalities or when governments do this. So we're delegating, it seems to me, a great deal of authority over what exactly is the board doing? What exactly are these unelected people on a board of directors doing that may or may not encumber an individual council that makes up a member of Middlesex County or the county at large? I suspect it's going to encumber an individual municipality because we're talking about services and infrastructure and lands. So I'm confused as to the relationship or the purpose for doing it. Like, we want to bring economic development to our region. Great. But I cannot at any point in time answer the question of people when they say, well, what exactly is it and how does it work? I'm like, I really don't get it.
Kara, would you want to address the question or comment?
Through you, Warden, to the council member. It is a somewhat difficult concept, I think, to envision at times with the delivery of economic development being so entrenched in municipal politics and within municipal function. An economic development corporation's purpose is never to encumber any one municipality. It is to assist them in the process in ways in which a municipality may not otherwise be able to act. Nonprofit organizations that are established with elected representatives of industry, of communities, and of political bodies have certain allowances afforded to them that a single municipality, whether at the local or county level, would otherwise not be able to access. Sometimes this means funding. Sometimes this means partnerships, which allow such an organization to act in different ways that can advance the efforts of a municipality. But I want to assure you, in no way would any recommendation be to encumber a municipality in any such way. It would be to assist it in facilitating its direction. It is a different concept than an internal department, certainly. And the point of having an implementation plan followed by a very robust business plan is the way that that is explained. And I can understand that at this point, it is not purely defined in your mind, and I wouldn't expect it to be at this point. I think what's being presented here are best practices. There are certainly reasons why this process has been undertaken by many other municipalities over the course of the economic development function, some for decades and decades. But I would not expect that that would be fully defined in your viewpoint at this point.
Did you have an add-on?
I very much appreciate what the director brings. It still remains very vague to me. It sounds like a think tank, an advocacy group. I guess at the end of the day, I want to be able to say there's value for $1 million decision we're about to make. $1 million sounds to me like it's every year. So I want to see the value. I want to know what is going on with this group. And especially when we're delegating, it seems to me we're delegating authority over to unelected people. And that always worries me because that's not the fundamental basis of government, like elected government. So I remain in the shadows on this. I'll continue to read it and I'll continue to talk to my fellow councillors that perhaps are able to enlighten me. But I mean, I can't support $1 million to something that I simply can't say to somebody, this is what it's going to do. Thank you.
Is there, Councillor Mayhew.
Thank you, Madam Warden. I think there's merit in this. I really do. And in my former comments, I hope we're not skeptical about an entity being left out. I know the work that the county has done to our small business, particularly in Kara's work, and I've worked with her extensively over the last 6.5 years. I think the process has to be more than a leap of faith. I think that's what we're having difficulty with. I think what the questions I get, is it going to be an equitable arrangement between in terms of target marketing, prospective investors in Middlesex County? Is that will the focus be on one or two of the numerous municipalities we have in here? How can you assure some equitable strategies? How can you assure municipal engagement? But there's certainly no question in terms of incubating an idea to an investment. I think needs the corporation to do it, because there's many factors that enter into the equation, even financing. The private corporation may be better at obtaining financing than an economic development committee. But I think I think there's merit in going forward. I do think, as Councillor McGuire has indicated, there are some blanks that are not perhaps really filled in yet in terms of municipalities do not want to lose that autonomy. We want to work with a development corporation. And that being said, I think that would erase that leap of faith and, make the decision making much more palatable for many of the councillors around here.
Councillor Burkhart Jessen.
I would actually echo, thank you through the warden, sorry about that. I would echo and jump on what Councillor Mayhew has said. In my experience over the last number of years, how economic development has been administered through the county, it's really been an evolution. When I first got on county council, it was a part-time contract person that delivered economic development for the county, worked with the local municipalities. And we saw some successes. We always seemed to kind of have like one foot there, but we weren't quite there. And so the discussion of the day was, were we in it or were we out? And at that time, council decided, okay, let's jump into this at that time. Then it became a full-time position. And then we've seen how the economic development department has grown over the years. I would say at this stage, we're back to the question that we had, 10 years ago. Are we in it or are we out of it? Because there are opportunities that are at our doorstep that, in the way that the department is set up at the moment, we're not able to take advantage of those opportunities. An economic development corporation will open up doors to us that we are not able to open up today. You can see that with what's happening, with our neighbor in the City of London. We can see that what's happening in St. Thomas and what they've been able to do. And it's through investments that they're being able to make. It's through partnerships that they're able to develop, that as a county structure, we can't take advantage of. I don't believe for one moment, given the, I would say, given how Middlesex County's reputation of how we work with local municipalities and how we work with local governance, that at no point the Middlesex County Economic Development Corporation is going to bind a local municipality or do anything to harm Middlesex County, to put us into any sort of jeopardy. I really do believe that it's 2024 and it's time that we act like it's 2024, that we are a growing and thriving municipality. There is opportunity for investment, and it's time that we take advantage of that. The implementation strategy, I really do think, will explain how that's going to happen. And those unanswered questions that we all have will come through that strategy. And that's my 2 cents.
Sorry, I'm just trying to make sure I'm
Okay.
clear. Go ahead, the floor is yours.
Yeah, no, and that was my clarity is that I want to ensure. So what I'm being told now is in order to see the implementation strategy, there has to be some allocation of dollars in order to get to that implementation strategy. So is that correct? Okay, I'm okay with that. That's what I was trying to get at, right? I didn't want to see something go to the budget committee and be approved. And as a counselor, say, here, go, what happened? Something got approved. So in order to see that implementation strategy and to have this discussion carry on, which I think is relevant and necessary, we do need to allocate the dollars in order to have that strategy come back so we can continue to have the discussion. And counselor, that's what I was trying to do, was to continue to have the discussion. I didn't want to just go to budget committee and have it allocated. So having heard the discussion, I always appreciate the input. I'm willing to withdraw my motion to the current one in front of us with the understanding that it's just dollars to create the implementation strategy.
Go ahead, Counselor.
I too would withdraw seconding that motion. Since we've had further discussion here, I'm now thinking we're looking at it through the same lens as we are SCORE, where it's going to come to the budget. We're going to see what the corporation's going to do, what SCORE is going to do. Do they support each other? Do they overlap? Do they duplicate? Like Alan had mentioned earlier, are we going to be paying for two services to do the same thing? I guess that would be valuable conversation at the budget committee. Sure.
Go say now if I understand. Oh, wait, do you want to explain that better? Okay, so we have an offer to withdraw and also the seconder. So the original motion is before us unadulterated as per your agenda. I will look for a mover and a seconder for the motion as presented in your documents, Councillor Burkhart-Jessen and Councillor Clark. I'll call the vote then. All in favor of the motion as presented? Please leave your hand up. The clerk wants to make sure. And opposed? There are none opposed. Okay, that is carried. Thank you very much. Councillor, do you have a comment?
Just one comment. I think this discussion just is a good reminder that all of council's invited to come to our budget deliberations. So you can see what it is that we actually do talk about.
And just as a sidebar, I have them marked on my calendar. Counselor and I will be there.
Okay. So that was a bit of a windy road, but these are good to have and make sure everyone's very clear about where we want to go and why and how. All right. Thank you, gentlemen, again for your presentation and your time today. Now we can move on to correspondence and information items. Is there anything at all here that anyone wants to comment on or pull for questions? Seeing none, in that case, the motion before us is, where'd it go? That items 9D1 through 9D13 be received for information. Mover, please, Councillor Clark and Councillor Mayhew, thank you. All in favor of that? And that is carried. There is no closed session today, so we need to rise from, we need to do our bylaws. I'm sorry, here it is. Oh, here it is. We need to rise and report, rise from the committee of the whole, and that would be at 3:28 p.m. Mover, please, Councillors McMillan and Councillor Clark, thank you. All in favor? And that is carried, thank you. And now we have bylaws. First of all, there are two. One for approval of lease agreement and one for the to confirm the proceedings of today. The motion before us is that the bylaws be given a first and second reading. Mover, please, Councillor McMillan and Councillor McGuire. Thank you. All in favor? And that is carried. And that the bylaws be given a third and final reading. A mover, please, and a seconder. Councillor McMillan and Councillor Burkhart Jessen. Thank you. All in favor? And that is carried as well. Our next meetings coming up are going to be on Tuesday, October 8th and 22nd. And then the last meeting before our inaugural will be the November 12th meeting. We need a motion to adjourn the meeting at 3:29 p.m. It's moved by Councillor Ropp and seconded by Councillor McGuire. All in favor?